Ladies and gentlemen, today, we gather to reflect on one of the most pivotal moments in American history, the First Battle of Bull Run, also known as the First Battle of Manassas. This battle, fought on July 21, 1861, near Manassas, Virginia, marked the first major land engagement of the American Civil War. It was a clash that shattered illusions, revealed the brutal realities of war, and set the stage for the long and bloody conflict that would follow. Let us delve into the events, significance, and legacy of this historic battle. The context: a nation divided. To understand the First Battle of Bull Run, we must first examine the context in which it occurred. By the spring of 1861, the United States was a nation torn apart. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 had deepened the divide between the North and the South. Southern states, fearing the abolition of slavery and the erosion of their way of life, seceded from the Union, forming the Confederate States of America. The attack on Fort Sumter in April 1861 marked the beginning of open hostilities, and both sides rushed to mobilize their forces. The North, confident in its industrial and numerical superiority, believed the war would be short-lived. Many in the Union expected a quick victory, with some even suggesting that a single decisive battle would crush the rebellion. The South, on the other hand, was determined to defend its independence and prove its military prowess. It was against this backdrop of overconfidence and determination that the First Battle of Bull Run unfolded. The road to Bull Run. In the weeks leading up to the battle, both Union and Confederate forces gathered near Washington, D.C., and Richmond, Virginia. The Union Army, under the command of General Irvin McDowell, was tasked with advancing into Virginia and capturing the vital railroad junction at Manassas. This move was intended to open the way to Richmond, the Confederate capital, and deliver a crushing blow to the rebellion. The Confederate forces, led by General P.G.T. Beauregard, were stationed near Bull Run, a small river in northern Virginia. Beauregard's army was reinforced by troops under General Joseph E. Johnston, who managed to outmaneuver Union forces in the Shenendoa Valley and join the defense of Manassas. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test the mettle of both armies. The battle, chaos and carnage. On the morning of July 21, 1861, the Union Army launched its attack. McDowell's plan was to flank the Confederate left, forcing them to retreat. Initially, the Union forces made progress, crossing Bull Run and pushing the Confederates back. However, the Confederate lines held, thanks in part to the determined leadership of generals like Thomas J. Jackson, who earned his famous nickname Stonewall during the battle. As the day wore on, the battle descended into chaos. Both sides were inexperienced, and the heat and exhaustion took their toll. The Confederate forces, bolstered by reinforcements, launched a counterattack that turned the tide of the battle. The Union retreat quickly turned into a rout, with soldiers and civilians alike fleeing in panic back to Washington, D.C. The aftermath, a harsh reality. The First Battle of Bull Run was a sobering wake-up call for both the North and the South. The Union suffered approximately 2,900 casualties, while the Confederates lost around 2,000. The battle demonstrated that the war would not be won easily or quickly. It exposed the inadequacies of both armies, from poor leadership to lack of training and logistics. For the South, the victory at Bull Run was a morale booster, but it also created a false sense of invincibility. For the North, the defeat was a humbling experience that led to a re-evaluation of strategy and leadership. President Lincoln replaced McDowell with General George B. McClellan, who would go on to reorganize and train the Union Army. The legacy of Bull Run. The First Battle of Bull Run holds a significant place in the history of the American Civil War. It was the first major battle of the conflict, and it set the tone for the brutal and protracted war that followed. The battle also highlighted the importance of preparation, leadership, and adaptability in warfare. Moreover, Bull Run shattered the romanticized notions of war that had prevailed at the time. The sight of dead and wounded soldiers, the chaos of the battlefield, and the realization that the war would not end quickly brought a grim reality to the forefront. It was a turning point that forced both sides to confront the harsh truths of the conflict. Lessons for the future. As we reflect on the First Battle of Bull Run, we are reminded of the sacrifices made by those who fought and died on that fateful day. We are also reminded of the importance of unity, resilience, and the pursuit of a just cause. The battle serves as a testament to the enduring spirit of a nation grappling with its identity and values. Let us honor the memory of those who fought at Bull Run by striving to build a future rooted in understanding, reconciliation, and peace. May their courage and sacrifice inspire us to confront the challenges of our own time with the same determination and resolve. The First Battle of Bull Run, a comprehensive analysis of the Union's key strategic mistakes. The First Battle of Bull Run, also known as the First Battle of Manassas, fought on July 21, 1861, marked the first major land battle of the American Civil War. It was a sobering wake-up call for both the Union and the Confederacy, revealing the harsh realities of war and the complexities of large-scale military operations. For the Union, the battle ended in a humiliating defeat, shattering the illusion of a quick and easy victory over the Confederacy. The Union's loss at Bull Run was not merely a result of Confederate resilience, but also a consequence of several critical strategic mistakes made by Union leadership. This article delves into the key strategic errors that contributed to the Union's defeat, examining the decisions, missteps, and oversights that shaped the outcome of this pivotal battle. Point 1. Overconfidence and underestimation of the enemy. One of the most significant strategic mistakes made by the Union was its overconfidence and underestimation of the Confederate forces. In the early months of the Civil War, many Northern politicians, military leaders, and civilians believed that the conflict would be short-lived. The Union, with its superior industrial capacity, larger population, and more extensive resources, was expected to crush the rebellion swiftly. This overconfidence led to a lack of preparedness and a dismissive attitude toward the Confederate Army. Key factors: public and political pressure. The Union faced immense pressure from politicians and the public to achieve a quick victory. The cry "On to Richmond" reflected the widespread belief that capturing the Confederate capital would end the war. This pressure influenced Union commanders to act hastily without adequate planning. Underestimating Confederate resolve, Union leaders failed to recognize the determination and fighting spirit of the Confederate soldiers. The Confederates were defending their homes and way of life, which gave them a psychological edge. Lack of respect for Confederate leadership. Union generals underestimated the capabilities of Confederate commanders like Pierre G.T. Beauregard and Thomas Stonewall Jackson. This underestimation led to poor tactical decisions on the battlefield. Point 2. Poor intelligence and reconnaissance. Effective intelligence and reconnaissance are critical to the success of any military operation. At Bull Run, the Union's lack of accurate information about Confederate positions, strength, and movements severely hampered its ability to execute a coherent strategy. Key factors: inadequate scouting. Union forces failed to conduct thorough reconnaissance of the battlefield. This lack of information led to confusion and miscoordination during the battle. Reliance on inaccurate maps. Union commanders relied on outdated or inaccurate maps, which contributed to poor decision-making. For example, the terrain around Bull Run was more challenging than anticipated, slowing the Union advance. Failure to anticipate Confederate reinforcements. Union leaders were unaware of the timely arrival of Confederate reinforcements under General Joseph E. Johnston, who played a decisive role in turning the tide of the battle. Point 3. Ineffective command structure and leadership. The Union's command structure during the First Battle of Bull Run was plagued by inefficiency, inexperience, and internal discord. The lack of cohesive leadership undermined the Union's ability to execute a unified strategy. Key factors: inexperienced leadership. Many Union officers, including Brigadier General Irvin McDowell, were inexperienced in handling large-scale military operations. McDowell, though competent, had never commanded an army in battle before. Lack of coordination. The Union Army suffered from poor coordination between its various units. Orders were often unclear or delayed, leading to disjointed attacks and missed opportunities. Political appointments. The Union Army was burdened by political appointees who lacked military expertise. These appointments weakened the overall effectiveness of the command structure. Point 4. Logistical failures and supply issues. Logistics play a vital role in the success of any military campaign. At Bull Run, the Union's logistical failures significantly hindered its ability to sustain its forces and execute its plans. Key factors: inadequate supplies. Union troops were poorly supplied, with insufficient food, ammunition, and medical resources. This lack of supplies demoralized the soldiers and reduced their combat effectiveness. Poor transportation. The Union's reliance on inadequate transportation systems delayed the movement of troops and supplies to the battlefield. The slow pace of the Union advance allowed the Confederates to reinforce their positions. Lack of medical preparedness. The Union Army was unprepared to handle the large number of casualties. The absence of a well-organized medical corps exacerbated the suffering of wounded soldiers. 5. Tactical errors on the battlefield. The Union's tactical mistakes during the battle itself were a major factor in its defeat. These errors included poor deployment of troops, ineffective use of artillery, and failure to exploit opportunities. Key factors: piecemeal attacks. Instead of launching a coordinated assault, Union forces attacked in piecemeal fashion, allowing the Confederates to concentrate their defenses and repel each attack individually. Failure to secure key terrain. The Union failed to secure critical positions, such as Henry House Hill, which became a focal point of the battle. Confederate forces, under the leadership of Stonewall Jackson, held this position tenaciously. Ineffective use of artillery. Union artillery was poorly positioned and inadequately supported, reducing its effectiveness. In contrast, Confederate artillery played a crucial role in repelling Union advances. Point 6. Lack of training and discipline. The Union Army at Bull Run was largely composed of inexperienced volunteers who lacked the training and discipline necessary for effective combat. This lack of preparation was a significant liability on the battlefield. Key factors: inexperienced troops. Many Union soldiers had only recently enlisted and had little to no combat experience. Their lack of training made them prone to panic and disorganization under fire. Poor discipline. The absence of strict discipline led to breakdowns in order during the battle. When Confederate forces launched a counterattack, many Union troops fled in disarray, turning an orderly retreat into a rout. Over-reliance on enthusiasm. Union leaders mistakenly believed that the enthusiasm of their volunteers would compensate for their lack of training. This over-reliance on morale rather than skill proved disastrous. Point 7. Failure to adapt to changing circumstances. The Union's inability to adapt to the evolving dynamics of the battle was another critical mistake. As the situation on the battlefield changed, Union commanders failed to adjust their strategies accordingly. Key factors: rigid planning. Union leaders adhered rigidly to their initial plans, even when it became clear that those plans were not working. This inflexibility prevented them from capitalizing on emerging opportunities. Slow decision-making. The Union's command structure was slow to respond to developments on the battlefield. Delays in issuing orders and making decisions allowed the Confederates to seize the initiative. Failure to exploit weaknesses. At several points during the battle, the Union had opportunities to exploit weaknesses in the Confederate lines. However, these opportunities were missed due to indecision and poor coordination. Point 8. Psychological impact of the defeat. The Union's defeat at Bull Run had a profound psychological impact on both the Army and the Northern public. The battle exposed the harsh realities of war and shattered the illusion of a quick and easy victory. Key factors: loss of confidence. The defeat eroded confidence in Union leadership and raised doubts about the Union's ability to win the war. This loss of confidence had long-term consequences for the Union war effort. Demoralization of troops. The rout at Bull Run demoralized Union soldiers, many of whom had expected an easy victory. This demoralization affected their performance in subsequent battles. Impact on public opinion. The defeat shocked the Northern public, which had been led to believe that the war would be short and decisive. The realization that the conflict would be long and bloody led to a shift in public sentiment. The First Battle of Bull Run was a watershed moment in the American Civil War, exposing the Union's strategic shortcomings and highlighting the challenges of waging a large-scale conflict. The Union's defeat was the result of a combination of factors, including overconfidence, poor intelligence, ineffective leadership, logistical failures, tactical errors, lack of training, and an inability to adapt to changing circumstances. These mistakes not only cost the Union a victory at Bull Run, but also set the stage for a long and grueling war. The lessons learned from Bull Run were invaluable for the Union. In the aftermath of the battle, Union leaders began to address many of the issues that had contributed to their defeat. The Union Army underwent significant reforms, including improved training, better logistics, and a more professional command structure. These changes ultimately contributed to the Union's eventual victory in the Civil War. The First Battle of Bull Run serves as a reminder of the importance of strategic planning, effective leadership, and adaptability in military operations. It underscores the fact that success in war depends not only on material superiority, but also on the ability to learn from mistakes and adapt to the realities of the battlefield. The First Battle of Bull Run, Manassas, a comprehensive analysis introduction. The First Battle of Bull Run, also known as the First Battle of Manassas, was the first major land battle of the American Civil War. Fought on July 21, 1861, near Manassas, Virginia, this battle marked a significant turning point in the conflict, shattering the illusion that the war would be short and bloodless. The battle's outcome was heavily influenced by the arrival of Confederate reinforcements, which dramatically altered the course of the engagement. This article delves into the intricate details of the battle, focusing on how the arrival of these reinforcements turned the tide in favor of the Confederacy. The road to Bull Run. By the summer of 1861, the United States was deeply divided. The secession of Southern states following Abraham Lincoln's election in 1860 had led to the formation of the Confederate States of America. Both the Union and the Confederacy were eager to assert their dominance, and the First Battle of Bull Run was the first large-scale confrontation between the two sides. The Union, under the command of General Irvin McDowell, aimed to capture the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia. The Confederate forces, led by General P.G.T. Beauregard, were determined to defend their territory and repel the Union advance. The battle took place near a small stream called Bull Run, close to the strategic railroad junction at Manassas. The opposing forces, the Union Army of Northeastern Virginia, commanded by McDowell, consisted of approximately 35,000 troops. These soldiers were largely inexperienced, with many having enlisted for only 90 days. The Confederate Army of the Potomac, under Beauregard, initially numbered around 22,000 men. However, the Confederates had the advantage of fighting on familiar terrain and were bolstered by the arrival of reinforcements from General Joseph E. Johnston's Army of the Shenandoah. The battle begins. Initial movements. On the morning of July 21, 1861, McDowell launched his offensive. His plan was to outflank the Confederate left wing, forcing them to retreat. The Union forces crossed Bull Run at Sudley Ford and began their advance. Initially, the Union troops made significant progress, pushing back the Confederate defenders. The Confederate forces, however, were not easily dislodged. They put up a fierce resistance, and the battle quickly devolved into a series of intense skirmishes. The Union's initial success was hampered by poor coordination and communication, which allowed the Confederates to regroup and counterattack. The arrival of Confederate reinforcements. The turning point of the battle came with the arrival of Confederate reinforcements. General Johnston had been stationed in the Shenandoah Valley with around 11,000 troops. Recognizing the importance of the battle at Bull Run, Johnston swiftly moved his forces to reinforce Beauregard. The timely arrival of Johnston's troops was facilitated by the Manassas Gap Railroad, which allowed the Confederates to rapidly transport their forces to the battlefield. This strategic use of rail transport was a significant factor in the Confederate victory. The impact of reinforcements. The arrival of Johnston's reinforcements had an immediate and profound impact on the battle. The fresh troops bolstered the Confederate lines, providing much-needed support to the weary defenders. The reinforcements also brought with them experienced officers, including Thomas J. Jackson, who would later earn the nickname Stonewall for his steadfast defense during the battle. The Union forces, already struggling with coordination and communication, were unprepared for the sudden influx of Confederate troops. The Confederate counterattack, led by Jackson and other officers, was relentless. The Union lines began to waver, and the initial momentum they had gained was quickly lost. The Confederate counterattack. With the arrival of reinforcements, the Confederates launched a coordinated counterattack. Jackson's brigade played a crucial role in this effort, holding the line against repeated Union assaults. The Confederate forces, now bolstered by fresh troops, pushed the Union forces back across Bull Run. The Union retreat quickly turned into a rout. The inexperienced Union troops, many of whom had never been in combat before, panicked and fled the battlefield. The retreat was chaotic, with soldiers abandoning their weapons and equipment in their haste to escape. The Confederates pursued the retreating Union forces, but their own disorganization and exhaustion prevented them from capitalizing fully on their victory. Aftermath and significant casualties and losses. The First Battle of Bull Run was a bloody affair, with both sides suffering significant casualties. The Union forces lost approximately 2,896 men, including killed, wounded, and missing. The Confederates, while victorious, also suffered heavy losses, with around 1,982 casualties. The battle was a stark reminder of the brutal nature of the Civil War. The high casualty rates and the chaotic retreat of the Union forces shattered any illusions that the war would be short or easy. Strategic implications. The Confederate victory at Bull Run had several important strategic implications. It boosted Southern morale and demonstrated that the Confederacy was capable of defending itself against Union forces. The battle also highlighted the importance of logistics and transportation, as the timely arrival of Johnston's reinforcements via the Manassas Gap Railroad was a key factor in the Confederate success. For the Union, the defeat was a sobering wake-up call. It underscored the need for better training, organization, and leadership. The Union Army would undergo significant reforms in the months following the battle, as the North prepared for a long and grueling conflict. The role of reinforcements. The arrival of Confederate reinforcements was undoubtedly the decisive factor in the outcome of the First Battle of Bull Run. Without the timely arrival of Johnston's troops, it is likely that the Union forces would have been able to achieve their objectives and secure a victory. The reinforcements not only bolstered the Confederate numbers, but also brought experienced leadership and a renewed sense of determination to the Confederate forces. The battle demonstrated the importance of mobility and logistics in modern warfare. The ability to rapidly move troops to the battlefield via rail transport gave the Confederates a significant advantage. This lesson would not be lost on military leaders on both sides as the war progressed. The First Battle of Bull Run was a pivotal moment in the American Civil War. It marked the end of the war's initial phase, and set the stage for the long and bloody conflict that would follow. The arrival of Confederate reinforcements was the key factor that turned the tide in favor of the Confederacy, highlighting the importance of logistics, leadership, and coordination in military operations. The battle also served as a stark reminder of the human cost of war. The high casualty rates and the chaotic retreat of the Union forces underscored the brutal reality of the conflict. As the war continued, Both sides would learn valuable lessons from the First Battle of Bull Run, shaping the strategies and tactics that would define the rest of the Civil War. In the end, the First Battle of Bull Run was not just a military engagement. It was a turning point that set the stage for the years of struggle and sacrifice that would follow. The arrival of Confederate reinforcements was the catalyst that changed the course of the battle, and in doing so, it changed the course of the war. The role of Thomas J. Jackson in the First Battle of Bull Run. The First Battle of Bull Run, also known as the First Battle of Manassas, was the first major land battle of the American Civil War. Fought on July 21, 1861, near Manassas, Virginia, it marked the beginning of a long and bloody conflict between the northern states, the Union, and the southern states, the Confederacy. Among the many figures who emerged from this battle, one name stands out: Thomas J. Jackson, who would later be known as Stonewall Jackson. His role in the First Battle of Bull Run was pivotal, and his actions on that day would cement his place in American military history. This article will explore the role that Thomas J. Jackson played in the First Battle of Bull Run, examining his background, his actions during the battle, and the impact of his performance on the outcome of the battle and the wider war. We will also consider the legacy of Jackson's actions and how they influenced the course of the Civil War. Chapter 1: The Road to Bull Run. Thomas J. Jackson. Early life and military career. Thomas Jonathan Jackson was born on January 21, 1824, in Clarksburg, Virginia, now West Virginia. Orphaned at a young age, Jackson was raised by relatives and had a difficult childhood. Despite these challenges, he was determined to succeed and eventually secured an appointment to the United States Military Academy at West Point. Jackson graduated from West Point in 1846, just in time to serve in the Mexican-American War. During the war, he distinguished himself as a brave and capable officer, earning promotions and commendations for his actions in several key battles. After the war, Jackson served in various posts, including teaching at the Virginia Military Institute, VMI, in Lexington, Virginia. The secession crisis and Jackson's decision to join the Confederacy. As the secession crisis unfolded in 1860 and 1861, Jackson, like many Southerners, faced a difficult decision. Despite his service in the U.S. Army, Jackson's loyalty lay with his home state of Virginia. When Virginia seceded from the Union in April 1861, Jackson resigned his commission and offered his services to the Confederacy. Jackson was quickly appointed as a colonel in the Virginia militia and was tasked with organizing and training troops. His reputation as a disciplined and effective leader grew rapidly, and he was soon promoted to brigadier general in the Confederate Army. The strategic importance of Bull Run. By the summer of 1861, both the Union and the Confederacy were eager to strike a decisive blow. The Union, under President Abraham Lincoln, sought to quickly crush the rebellion and restore the Union. The Confederacy, led by President Jefferson Davis, aimed to defend its territory and secure recognition from foreign powers. The First Battle of Bull Run was the result of these competing objectives. The Union Army, under the command of Brigadier General Irvin McDowell, planned to advance on the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia. To do so, they would need to defeat the Confederate forces gathered near Manassas Junction, a key railroad hub. The Confederate Army, commanded by Brigadier General P.G.T. Beauregard, was determined to defend Manassas and prevent the Union from advancing further into Virginia. The stage was set for a major confrontation. Chapter 2. The First Battle of Bull Run. The opening moves on July 16, 1861. McDowell's Union Army began its march from Washington, D.C., towards Manassas. The Union forces numbered around 35,000 men, while the Confederate forces under Beauregard numbered approximately 22,000. However, Beauregard was soon reinforced by troops under General Joseph E. Johnston, who arrived from the Shenandoah Valley. Jackson's brigade, part of Johnston's army, played a crucial role in the Confederate defense. Jackson's men were among the first to arrive at Manassas, and they quickly took up positions on the Confederate left flank, near a key strategic point known as Henry House Hill. The battle began in earnest on the morning of July 21, 1861. McDowell's Union forces launched a series of attacks on the Confederate left flank, aiming to turn the Confederate line and force a retreat. The initial Union assaults were successful, and the Confederate forces began to waver. It was at this critical moment that Thomas J. Jackson earned his famous nickname. As the Union forces advanced, Jackson's brigade stood firm on Henry House Hill. Confederate General Barnard E.B., seeing Jackson's steadfastness, reportedly exclaimed, "There is Jackson standing like a stone wall. Rally behind the Virginians." The name Stonewall Jackson would stick, and his brigade would become known as the Stonewall Brigade. Jackson's defense of Henry House Hill was a turning point in the battle. Despite heavy Union artillery fire and repeated infantry assaults, Jackson's men held their ground. Jackson's calm and resolute demeanor under fire inspired his troops and helped to steady the Confederate line. Jackson's tactical acumen was also on display. He positioned his artillery effectively, using the high ground to his advantage. He also made use of the terrain, deploying his infantry in a way that maximized their defensive capabilities. As the Union attacks continued, Jackson's brigade repulsed each one, inflicting heavy casualties on the Union forces. The Confederate counterattack. As the day wore on, the tide of the battle began to turn in favor of the Confederates. Reinforcements arrived, and the Confederate commanders, including Jackson, launched a counterattack. Jackson's brigade played a key role in this counterattack, advancing steadily and driving the Union forces back. The Union Army, already fatigued and disorganized, began to retreat. The retreat quickly turned into a rout, as Union soldiers fled back towards Washington, D.C. The Confederate victory at Bull Run was complete, and Jackson's role in the battle was widely celebrated. Chapter 3. The impact of Jackson's actions. Immediate aftermath of the battle. The First Battle of Bull Run was a significant victory for the Confederacy and a humiliating defeat for the Union. The battle demonstrated that the war would be neither short nor easy, and it shattered any illusions of a quick Union victory. For Thomas J. Jackson, the battle was a defining moment. His steadfast defense of Henry House Hill and his role in the Confederate counterattack earned him widespread acclaim. He was promoted to Major General and given command of the Confederate forces in the Shenandoah Valley. Jackson's growing reputation. Jackson's performance at Bull Run cemented his reputation as one of the Confederacy's most capable and fearless commanders. His nickname, Stonewall, became synonymous with steadfastness and courage under fire. Jackson's leadership style, characterized by discipline, meticulous planning, and aggressive tactics, would become a hallmark of his military career. The strategic impact of the battle. The Confederate victory at Bull Run had significant strategic implications. It boosted Southern morale and demonstrated that the Confederacy could defend itself against a larger and better equipped Union army. The battle also forced the Union to rethink its strategy, leading to a more prolonged and brutal war. Jackson's actions at Bull Run also had a lasting impact on the Confederate war effort. His success in the Shenandoah Valley Campaign, which followed shortly after Bull Run, further enhanced his reputation and demonstrated the effectiveness of his tactics. Jackson's ability to outmaneuver and defeat larger Union forces in the valley earned him the nickname Foot Cavalry and made him a legend in the South. Chapter 4. The legacy of Thomas J. Jackson. Jackson's influence on the Civil War. Thomas J. Jackson's role in the First Battle of Bull Run was just the beginning of his storied military career. Over the next 2 years, Jackson would become one of the Confederacy's most successful and celebrated generals. His campaigns in the Shenandoah Valley, his role in the 7 Days Battles, and his performance at the Second Battle of Bull Run and the Battle of Fredericksburg further solidified his reputation as a military genius. Jackson's death at the Battle of Chancellorsville in May 1863 was a significant blow to the Confederacy. His loss was deeply felt by both his troops and the Southern leadership, and many historians believe that his absence was a contributing factor to the Confederate defeat at the Battle of Gettysburg later that year. Jackson's military tactics and leadership. Jackson's military tactics and leadership style were studied and admired by both his contemporaries and later generations of military leaders. His emphasis on speed, surprise, and aggressive action became known as Jackson's Way, and his ability to inspire and lead his troops was unparalleled. Jackson's success on the battlefield was due in large part to his meticulous planning and attention to detail. He was known for his thorough reconnaissance, careful preparation, and ability to anticipate his enemy's moves. His use of terrain and his ability to concentrate his forces at the decisive point were key factors in his many victories. Jackson's legacy in American history. Thomas J. Jackson's legacy in American history is complex and multifaceted. To many in the South, he remains a hero and a symbol of the Confederate cause. His military achievements are celebrated, and his nickname, Stonewall, is synonymous with courage and determination. However, Jackson's legacy is also tied to the cause for which he fought, the preservation of slavery and the Confederate States of America. As such, his memory is viewed differently by those who see the Confederacy as a symbol of oppression and racism. Despite these differing perspectives, there is no denying the impact that Thomas J. Jackson had on the American Civil War. His role in the First Battle of Bull Run was a defining moment in his career and a turning point in the war. Jackson's actions on that day helped to shape the course of the conflict and left an indelible mark on American history. The First Battle of Bull Run was a pivotal moment in the American Civil War, and Thomas J. Jackson's role in the battle was crucial to the Confederate victory. His steadfast defense of Henry House Hill, his leadership during the Confederate counterattack, and his ability to inspire his troops were key factors in the outcome of the battle. Jackson's performance at Bull Run earned him the nickname Stonewall and set the stage for his future successes as one of the Confederacy's most celebrated generals. His legacy as a military leader and his impact on the Civil War continue to be studied and debated by historians and military scholars. In the end, Thomas J. Jackson's role in the First Battle of Bull Run was not just a moment of personal triumph, but a defining chapter in the history of the American Civil War. His actions on that day helped to shape the course of the conflict and left an enduring legacy that continues to be remembered and analyzed to this day. The First Battle of Bull Run and its impact on public opinion in the North and South. The First Battle of Bull Run, also known as the First Battle of Manassas, was the first major land battle of the American Civil War. Fought on July 21, 1861, near Manassas, Virginia, it pitted the Union Army against the Confederate Army in a brutal and chaotic confrontation that ended in a Confederate victory. The battle had profound implications for both the North and the South, not only in terms of military strategy, but also in shaping public opinion. This article explores the immediate and long-term effects of the First Battle of Bull Run on the attitudes, morale, and expectations of the Northern and Southern populations. Background: the road to Bull Run, the secession crisis, and the outbreak of war. The American Civil War began in April 1861. Following the secession of 11 Southern states from the Union and the Confederate attack on Fort Sumter. The secession crisis had been brewing for years, fueled by deep-seated sectional tensions over issues such as states' rights, economic policies, and, most prominently, slavery. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860, a Republican who opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories, was the final catalyst for Southern secession. By the summer of 1861, both the North and the South were mobilizing for war. The Union, under President Lincoln, sought to preserve the United States and prevent the spread of secession. The Confederacy, led by President Jefferson Davis, aimed to secure its independence and protect its way of life, which was deeply intertwined with the institution of slavery. Early expectations of a short war. In the early months of the war, there was a widespread belief, particularly in the North, that the conflict would be brief and relatively bloodless. Many Northerners, including politicians, journalists, and military leaders, believed that the Union's superior resources, industry, and population would quickly overwhelm the Confederacy. This sentiment was encapsulated in the popular cry, "On to Richmond," which reflected the expectation that a swift march to the Confederate capital would bring the rebellion to an end. In the South, there was also a sense of optimism. Southerners believed in the righteousness of their cause and the martial prowess of their people. They were confident that their armies, led by skilled commanders, could defend their homeland against Northern aggression. The Southern press often portrayed the Union as a weak and divided adversary that would soon tire of the fight. The gathering of armies. By July 1861, both sides had assembled sizable armies near Manassas Junction, a strategic railroad hub in northern Virginia. The Union Army of Northeastern Virginia, commanded by Brigadier General Irvin McDowell, consisted of approximately 35,000 troops, many of whom were inexperienced volunteers. The Confederate Army of the Potomac, led by Brigadier General P.G.T. Beauregard, numbered around 32,000 men, also largely composed of raw recruits. The stage was set for the first major clash of the war. The battle would not only test the military capabilities of both sides but also reveal the harsh realities of war to a public that had been largely sheltered from its horrors. The First Battle of Bull Run. A summary: the Union plan and initial advances. General McDowell's plan for the battle was to launch a flanking attack on the Confederate left, with the aim of turning their position and cutting off their line of retreat. On the morning of July 21st, Union forces began their advance, crossing Bull Run Creek and engaging Confederate troops near Matthews Hill. Initially, the Union made progress, pushing the Confederates back and creating a sense of optimism among Northern troops and observers. Confederate reinforcements and the tide turns. However, the Confederate forces, though initially outnumbered, were able to hold their ground and receive critical reinforcements. Brigadier General Joseph E. Johnston's army, which had been stationed in the Shenandoah Valley, arrived by rail to bolster Beauregard's troops. Among the reinforcements was Brigadier General Thomas J. Jackson, who earned his famous nickname Stonewall during the battle for his steadfast defense of Henry House Hill. As the day wore on, the Union advance began to falter. Confederate counterattacks, combined with the exhaustion and disorganization of Union troops, turned the tide of the battle. By late afternoon, the Union Army was in full retreat, fleeing back toward Washington, D.C., in a chaotic and humiliating rout. Casualties and aftermath. The First Battle of Bull Run was a bloody and costly engagement for both sides. The Union suffered approximately 2,800 casualties, including killed, wounded, and missing, while the Confederates incurred around 2,000 casualties. The battle demonstrated the ferocity and lethality of modern warfare, shattering the illusion that the conflict would be a quick and easy affair. Impact on public opinion in the North. Shock and disillusionment. The Union defeat at Bull Run came as a profound shock to the Northern public. Many had expected a swift and decisive victory, and the reality of the battle's outcome was a bitter pill to swallow. The sight of Union troops fleeing in disarray back to Washington, D.C., was deeply demoralizing and undermined confidence in the Union's military leadership and strategy. Newspapers in the North, which had previously been filled with optimistic predictions of victory, now grappled with the sobering reality of defeat. The New York Times, for example, described the battle as a disaster and lamented the disgraceful conduct of the Union troops. The defeat forced Northerners to confront the possibility that the war would be longer and more difficult than they had anticipated. Calls for greater mobilization and preparation. In the wake of Bull Run, there was a growing recognition in the North that the war would require a more serious and sustained effort. President Lincoln and his administration responded by calling for the enlistment of more volunteers and the expansion of the Union Army. Congress passed legislation authorizing the recruitment of 500,000 additional troops, and efforts were made to improve training, equipment, and logistics. The defeat also led to a re-evaluation of Union military leadership. General McDowell, who had been widely criticized for his handling of the battle, was replaced by Major General George B. McClellan. McClellan, who had gained a reputation for his organizational skills, was tasked with rebuilding and training the Union Army into a more effective fighting force. The rise of realism and determination. While the defeat at Bull Run was a blow to Northern morale, it also had the effect of galvanizing many in the North to redouble their efforts. The battle served as a wake-up call, dispelling any lingering illusions about the ease of victory and reinforcing the need for a more determined and realistic approach to the war. Public opinion in the North began to shift from a sense of overconfidence to a more sober understanding of the challenges ahead. The war was no longer seen as a mere police action to suppress a rebellion, but as a serious and protracted conflict that would require the full mobilization of Northern resources and resolve. Political implications. The defeat at Bull Run also had significant political implications in the North. It strengthened the hand of those who argued for a more aggressive prosecution of the war, including the use of more forceful measures against the Confederacy. In the months following the battle, there was increasing pressure on the Lincoln administration to adopt a more hardline approach, including the eventual embrace of emancipation as a war aim. At the same time, the defeat exposed divisions within the Northern political landscape. Some Democrats, particularly those who had been skeptical of the war effort, used the defeat to criticize the Lincoln administration and call for a negotiated settlement with the Confederacy. However, these voices were in the minority, and the overall trend in the North was toward greater determination and commitment to the Union cause. Impact on public opinion in the South. Elation and confidence. In contrast to the North, the Confederate victory at Bull Run was met with widespread elation and a surge of confidence in the South. The battle was seen as a validation of Southern martial prowess and a vindication of the Confederate cause. Newspapers in the South hailed the victory as a triumph of Southern courage and determination, and it bolstered the belief that the Confederacy could successfully defend its independence against Northern aggression. The performance of Confederate generals, particularly Beauregard and Jackson, was celebrated, and they became heroes in the eyes of the Southern public. The battle also reinforced the perception that the South was fighting a defensive war to protect its homeland and way of life, which further solidified support for the Confederate cause. Overconfidence and complacency. While the victory at Bull Run was a source of pride and confidence in the South, it also had the unintended consequence of fostering a sense of overconfidence and complacency. Many Southerners began to believe that the war would be short and that the Confederacy could easily repel any further Union invasions. This overconfidence was reflected in the Southern press, which often downplayed the challenges facing the Confederacy and exaggerated the weaknesses of the Union. This sense of complacency had important implications for the Confederate war effort. It led to a reluctance to fully mobilize Southern resources and manpower, as many believed that the war would be won with minimal sacrifice. This attitude would later prove to be a significant handicap as the war dragged on and the Confederacy faced increasing pressure from the Union's superior resources and industrial capacity. The reality of war. Despite the initial euphoria, the First Battle of Bull Run also brought home the harsh realities of war to the Southern public. The high casualties and the brutality of the fighting were a stark reminder that the conflict would not be without cost. For many Southerners, the battle was a sobering experience that tempered their earlier optimism and forced them to confront the possibility of a long and bloody struggle. The battle also highlighted the challenges facing the Confederate war effort, including the need for better organization, training, and logistics. While the Confederacy had won a significant victory, it was clear that there was still much work to be done to build a capable and effective military force. Political implications. The victory at Bull Run had important political implications in the South as well. It strengthened the position of President Jefferson Davis and his administration, who were able to claim credit for the successful defense of the Confederacy. The battle also bolstered support for the Confederate government and helped to solidify the loyalty of the Southern population to the cause of independence. At the same time, the victory at Bull Run raised expectations for future military successes. The Southern public and political leaders began to press for more aggressive actions, including invasions of the North, in the belief that the Confederacy could achieve a decisive victory and secure its independence. This pressure would influence Confederate military strategy in the months and years to come. Long-term impact on public opinion. The North, a shift toward total war. The First Battle of Bull Run marked a turning point in the North's approach to the war. The defeat forced Northerners to confront the reality that the conflict would not be easily won and that a more comprehensive and determined effort would be required. This shift in public opinion laid the groundwork for the eventual adoption of a strategy of total war, aimed at not only defeating the Confederate Army, but also undermining the South's ability to wage war by targeting its economic and social infrastructure. The battle also contributed to a growing recognition of the need for emancipation as a war aim. As the war progressed, it became increasingly clear that slavery was a central pillar of the Confederate war effort, and that its abolition would be necessary to secure a lasting Union victory. This shift in public opinion would culminate in the issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 and the eventual passage of the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery in the United States. The South, the seeds of doubt. While the victory at Bull Run initially boosted Southern morale and confidence, it also sowed the seeds of doubt and overconfidence that would later haunt the Confederacy. The belief that the war would be short and easily won led to a lack of urgency in mobilizing Southern resources and manpower, which would prove to be a critical weakness as the war dragged on. The battle also highlighted the challenges facing the Confederacy, including the need for better organization, training, and logistics. As the war progressed, these challenges would become increasingly apparent, and the initial euphoria of Bull Run would give way to a more sober and realistic assessment of the Confederacy's prospects. The evolution of public opinion. The First Battle of Bull Run was a pivotal moment in the evolution of public opinion in both the North and the South. It marked the end of the initial phase of the war, characterized by overconfidence and unrealistic expectations, and ushered in a new phase characterized by a more sober and realistic understanding of the challenges ahead. In the North, the defeat at Bull Run served as a wake-up call, galvanizing public opinion and strengthening the resolve to fight for the preservation of the Union. In the South, the victory at Bull Run bolstered confidence and support for the Confederate cause, but also fostered a sense of overconfidence and complacency that would later prove to be a liability. The First Battle of Bull Run was a defining moment in the American Civil War, with profound implications for public opinion in both the North and the South. The battle shattered the illusion that the war would be short and bloodless, forcing both sides to confront the harsh realities of a protracted and brutal conflict. In the North, the defeat at Bull Run led to a shift in public opinion, from overconfidence to a more determined and realistic approach to the war. It galvanized support for the Union cause and laid the groundwork for the eventual adoption of a strategy of total war and the embrace of emancipation as a war aimed. In the South, the victory at Bull Run initially boosted morale and confidence, but also fostered a sense of overconfidence and complacency that would later prove to be a critical weakness. The battle highlighted the challenges facing the Confederacy and forced Southerners to confront the possibility of a long and difficult struggle. Ultimately, the First Battle of Bull Run was a turning point in the Civil War, shaping the attitudes, expectations, and strategies of both the North and the South. It marked the end of the war's initial phase, and set the stage for the more intense and destructive conflicts that would follow. The long-term consequences of the First Battle of Bull Run for the Civil War. Introduction. The First Battle of Bull Run, also known as the First Battle of Manassas, was fought on July 21, 1861, near Manassas, Virginia. It was the first major land battle of the American Civil War and marked a significant turning point in the conflict. The battle ended in a Confederate victory, shattering the Union's hopes of a quick and decisive end to the war. The long-term consequences of the First Battle of Bull Run were profound, influencing the strategies, morale, and political landscape of both the Union and the Confederacy. This article will explore these consequences in detail, examining how the battle shaped the course of the Civil War and its aftermath. 1. The illusion of a short war. Pre-battle expectations. Before the First Battle of Bull Run, many in the North and South believed that the war would be short-lived. The Union, with its superior resources and industrial capacity, expected a swift victory. The Confederacy, on the other hand, believed that their superior military leadership and the righteousness of their cause would lead to a quick recognition of their independence. The reality of a prolonged conflict. The Union's defeat at Bull Run shattered the illusion of a short war. The battle demonstrated that the Confederacy was a formidable opponent, capable of defending its territory against a larger and better-equipped Union army. This realization forced both sides to prepare for a prolonged and bloody conflict. The Union began to mobilize its resources more effectively, while the Confederacy sought to consolidate its gains and strengthen its defenses. Impact on public opinion. The battle also had a significant impact on public opinion. In the North, the defeat was a wake-up call, leading to increased support for the war effort and a greater willingness to endure the sacrifices necessary for victory. In the South, the victory at Bull Run boosted morale and reinforced the belief in the Confederacy's ability to achieve independence. However, it also led to overconfidence, with many Southerners underestimating the Union's resolve and capacity for sustained warfare. 2. Military strategies and tactics. Union strategy. The Anaconda Plan. The Union's initial strategy, known as the Anaconda Plan, aimed to suffocate the Confederacy by blockading its ports and controlling the Mississippi River. The defeat at Bull Run highlighted the need for a more comprehensive approach, leading to the development of a multi-front strategy that included both land and naval operations. Confederate strategy. Defensive warfare. The Confederate victory at Bull Run reinforced the South's strategy of defensive warfare. The Confederacy sought to protect its territory and wear down the Union's will to fight by inflicting heavy casualties. This strategy was evident in subsequent battles, such as the Second Battle of Bull Run and the Battle of Fredericksburg, where the Confederacy successfully repelled Union offensives. Evolution of tactics. The First Battle of Bull Run also influenced the evolution of military tactics. The battle demonstrated the importance of effective communication, coordination, and logistics. Both sides began to invest in better training, equipment, and organization, leading to more sophisticated and deadly warfare. The use of railroads, telegraphs, and other technologies became increasingly important, as did the development of new tactics, such as trench warfare and the use of artillery. Point 3. Leadership and command. Union leadership. The rise of McClellan. The Union's defeat at Bull Run led to a shakeup in its military leadership. General Irvin McDowell, who commanded the Union forces at Bull Run, was replaced by General George B. McClellan. McClellan was tasked with reorganizing and training the Union Army, which he did with great success. However, his cautious approach and reluctance to engage the enemy would later become a source of frustration for President Abraham Lincoln and other Union leaders. Confederate leadership. The emergence of Lee and the Confederate side. The victory at Bull Run solidified the reputation of General Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson, whose steadfast defense of Henry House Hill earned him his famous nickname. The battle also marked the beginning of General Robert E. Lee's rise to prominence. Although Lee did not command at Bull Run, his subsequent leadership would prove crucial to the Confederacy's military successes. Political-military relations. The battle also highlighted the importance of political-military relations. President Lincoln's involvement in military strategy increased after Bull Run, as he sought to ensure that his generals were aligned with his vision for the war. This tension between political and military leaders would continue throughout the conflict, influencing key decisions and shaping the course of the war. Point 4. The home front economic impact. The First Battle of Bull Run had significant economic consequences for both the Union and the Confederacy. The Union's defeat led to increased spending on the war effort, including the expansion of the Army and Navy, the construction of fortifications, and the development of new weapons and technologies. The Confederacy, already struggling with limited resources, faced even greater challenges as it sought to sustain its war effort. Social impact. The battle also had a profound social impact. In the North, the defeat at Bull Run led to a surge in patriotism and a greater willingness to support the war effort. Women, in particular, played a crucial role in supporting the troops, organizing relief efforts, and working in factories and hospitals. In the South, the victory at Bull Run reinforced the belief in the righteousness of the Confederate cause, but it also led to increased demands on the civilian population, particularly in terms of food and supplies. Psychological impact. The psychological impact of the battle was significant. The Union's defeat was a blow to Northern morale, but it also galvanized the population to redouble their efforts. In the South, the victory at Bull Run boosted morale, but it also created unrealistic expectations of future successes. The battle's aftermath saw an increase in propaganda and rhetoric on both sides, as each sought to bolster support for their cause. 5. International relations. European perceptions. The First Battle of Bull Run had important implications for international relations, particularly with Europe. The Union's defeat was seen as evidence of the Confederacy's strength and resilience, leading some European powers, such as Britain and France, to consider recognizing the Confederacy as an independent nation. However, the Union's subsequent victories and the Emancipation Proclamation would eventually sway European opinion in favor of the North. Diplomatic efforts. The battle also influenced diplomatic efforts on both sides. The Confederacy sought to leverage its victory at Bull Run to gain recognition and support from foreign powers, while the Union worked to prevent such recognition and maintain its international standing. These diplomatic efforts would continue throughout the war, with both sides seeking to gain an advantage on the global stage. Impact on trade. The battle had a significant impact on trade, particularly with Europe. The Union's blockade of southern ports, which began in earnest after Bull Run, disrupted the Confederacy's ability to export cotton and other goods, leading to economic hardship. At the same time, the Union's need for supplies and equipment led to increased trade with Europe, particularly in the form of arms and munitions. 6. The path to emancipation. Initial reluctance. At the time of the First Battle of Bull Run, the Union's war aims were focused primarily on preserving the Union, rather than abolishing slavery. However, the battle's aftermath saw a gradual shift in Northern attitudes towards slavery, as the realities of the war forced a reconsideration of the institution's role in the conflict. The contraband policy. One of the immediate consequences of Bull Run was the Union's adoption of the contraband policy, which treated escaped slaves as property seized from the enemy. This policy marked the beginning of a more aggressive approach to slavery, as the Union sought to undermine the Confederacy's labor force and weaken its war effort. The Emancipation Proclamation. The long-term consequence of Bull Run was the eventual issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation by President Lincoln in 1863. The proclamation declared that all slaves in Confederate-held territory were to be freed, transforming the war into a struggle for freedom as well as union. This shift in war aims was a direct result of the lessons learned from Bull Run and the subsequent evolution of Union strategy. 7. The role of technology and innovation. Military technology. The First Battle of Bull Run highlighted the importance of technology and innovation in modern warfare. Both sides began to invest in new weapons, such as rifled muskets and artillery, as well as in the development of new tactics and strategies. The battle also demonstrated the potential of new technologies, such as the telegraph and railroads, to transform the conduct of war. Medical advances. The battle also had important implications for military medicine. The high number of casualties at Bull Run exposed the inadequacies of existing medical practices, leading to improvements in battlefield medicine, including the development of field hospitals, ambulance services, and more effective treatments for wounds and diseases. Engineering and logistics. The battle underscored the importance of engineering and logistics in modern warfare. Both sides began to invest in the construction of fortifications, roads, and bridges, as well as in the development of more efficient supply chains. These improvements would prove crucial in subsequent battles, as both the Union and the Confederacy sought to gain an advantage through better organization and planning. 8. The evolution of warfare. From Napoleonic to modern warfare. The First Battle of Bull Run marked a transition from the Napoleonic style of warfare, characterized by massed infantry and cavalry charges, to a more modern form of warfare that emphasized firepower, entrenchments, and maneuver. This evolution was driven by the lessons learned at Bull Run and the subsequent development of new tactics and technologies. The role of intelligence. The battle also highlighted the importance of intelligence in modern warfare. Both sides began to invest in reconnaissance, espionage, and the interception of communications, seeking to gain an advantage through better information and understanding of the enemy's intentions and capabilities. The impact of total war. The First Battle of Bull Run was an early example of the concept of total war, in which the entire resources of a nation are mobilized for the war effort. This approach would become increasingly evident as the war progressed, with both the Union and the Confederacy targeting not only each other's armies but also their civilian populations, infrastructure, and economies. 9. The legacy of Bull Run. Historical memory. The First Battle of Bull Run has left a lasting legacy in American historical memory. The battle is often remembered as a turning point in the Civil War, marking the end of the initial phase of the conflict and the beginning of a more protracted and bloody struggle. The battle's significance is reflected in the numerous monuments, memorials, and historical sites that commemorate the event. Military lessons. The battle also left a lasting legacy in terms of military lessons. The importance of preparation, training, and leadership, as well as the need for effective communication and coordination, were all underscored by the experience of Bull Run. These lessons would continue to influence military thinking and practice in the years and decades that followed. Cultural impact. The First Battle of Bull Run has also had a significant cultural impact. The battle has been the subject of numerous books, films, and other works of art, reflecting its importance in the American imagination. The battle's legacy continues to be felt in the ongoing debates over the causes, conduct, and consequences of the Civil War. Conclusion. The First Battle of Bull Run was a pivotal event in the American Civil War, with far-reaching consequences that shaped the course of the conflict and its aftermath. The battle shattered the illusion of a short war, leading to a prolonged and bloody struggle that would test the resolve and resources of both the Union and the Confederacy. The battle influenced military strategies and tactics, leadership and command, the home front, international relations, the path to emancipation, the role of technology and innovation, the evolution of warfare, and the legacy of the Civil War. The lessons learned from Bull Run continue to resonate in American history and military thought, serving as a reminder of the complexities and challenges of war.